Welcome back, Woodwork Geek here again. Something a bit different this week. So I've been playing with the CNC for a while, and I am by no means an expert, still learning, as you'll see a little bit later. But I did these Penrose triangles just to see how accurate I could get each of the different woods to lay up. Now, Penrose triangle is an impossible puzzle, really. So if you're interested in that, look it up on the internet. Wikipedia's got a good section on it, but it's basically a 3D triangle that interweaves in an impossible way. So the way that I made the triangle was to break it down into two parts. So you have male and female kind of parts to the triangle. So the first thing I do is I cut out the male parts. And if you can imagine the male parts, they're almost like a parallelogram. The edges are tapered. So each cut is a double cut. I use a 6mm end mill. And there you can see me breaking a bit. That was basically because I set the height incorrectly on the previous one and then didn't reset the machine, so it tried to push itself through without being switched on. So yep, still learning. Another 20 quid bit down the drain. But yeah, back to the kind of carving part here. So there's two tool paths used. I use a clearing bit, which is a 6mm end mill upcut, and then I use a tapered bit, which has got a 5.25, I think, degree taper on the side. So you end up with almost like a parallelogram. So the thin side of that goes into the female cutout, and as it pushes down, you get a tight joint between the two. If I did this again, I would rotate those male parts 45 degrees. As you probably saw, there was a lot of wastage, and so that was a second learning really of kind of doing this. So yeah, making progress, but still a long way to go. So here's the female kind of part starting to be carved out. And for this, I use a 2mm end mill, and then I use the same SPE tapered bit. And it's very important to use the same tapered bit to cut the male and the female, so that the angle for the tapered sides is exactly the same, and obviously you mirror the objects that you're trying to recreate, so that the original is one type, i.e. female, and then the male would be the mirrored version of that. So any differences between the two kind of work out when you put one on top of the other. I make the coasters actually out of oak. So this is a bit of American white oak that I had left over from another job. So I'm just kind of trying to see if it will work. I did a single coaster first, that worked, and then this is a set, well, it was supposed to be a set of 5, but as you'll see in a little bit, the first one suffers a mishap, so I only got 4 coasters out of this. But it was good learning. I learned that I must reset the machine every single time I do things, and if you're eagle-eyed a little bit later on, you'll even see where I accidentally hit the emergency stop and then have to recarve the same bit twice to get it through. But getting better. The key for this is the contrast with the woods, really. So when I was going through coming up with a thought process for this, I saw the Penrose triangle, and it had 3 different colours. So you had 3 different shades of grey in the illustration that I was looking at, and I kind of thought, well, that would work well if I used 3 different shades of wood. So I picked cherry, which is a medium kind of brown wood, walnut, which is a dark wood, and maple, which is a light wood. And then I put all of those 3 woods onto an oak backer, because the oak then becomes the constant colour across all of the kind of coasters. So here you can see I've cut my first male, I've cut my first set of females, and I'm just cleaning up the edges. So when the cutters go through, you get little tufts on some of the edges. A bit difficult to see through my elbow, I'm afraid, but you do get little tufts. So I just use a bit of 120 grit to pull that off, and do the same on the male parts. Each of the male parts I cut out on the bandsaw, just so that I can put them all in individually. The one thing that I would say is it makes much more sense to cut all of the males from the same thickness of wood, so that when you want to glue them together, you can actually do that without having to have different heights on each piece of wood. So even though that last one looks like it's got a different height, there are pieces of that are the same height. Once I've done my test fit, it's then time for a bit of glue. So Type 1-3 to the rescue. I just give them a bit quick blowout here, and then Type 1-3 in a French's bottle, which I have to say is really quite helpful if you ever need to replace your glue bottle. These French's mustard bottles are spot on, but no sponsorship deal as yet. I use a silicone spreader to make sure that the glue goes around and through all of the corners. I tend to just do the glue mainly on the female. What I'm trying to avoid here is too much glue underneath and then getting like a hydraulic lock where there's not enough space, and the glue then stops the part from going in. So I make sure that there's glue on all the surfaces, but I don't glue both surfaces for fear of trying to get too much glue and then glue in there and then ending up with a shadow line of glue as a consequence. And this works quite well so far for me, so kind of recommend it. It is a bit of trial and error to get the heights correct when you program the CNC for this. So I use Vectric V-carve, and I use a V-carve for the female, and then I use a pocket cut for the male and put a outer boundary around the male part to cut it out. And you do need to be quite specific. So the female depth has to equal the start depth and the cut depth of the pocket, and it's in reverse. So the start depth is the small value, and then the cut depth is the big value. So 5 mil is what I use. So I use 0.2 for the first value, and then 0.48 for the second value to make it to the 0.5. So once the walnut's dried, I bandsawed off the bulk of the material just so that I didn't get the bit kind of impact on it. It's still a bit proud, so it's kind of less than a millimetre, but it's close enough to then remachine. The key here is having a repeatable way to get that blank in exactly the same place for each carve to happen, and that's why you can see there's a jig on the table. I use that jig so that I get a fixed XY reference, and then I kind of use a couple of kind of wedges front and back against that to hold it in place, and that's worked pretty well. It's within 0.1 of a millimetre for this piece, so I'm quite comfortable with that. It's more than accurate for this. I will be doing an upgraded jig in the future. I'm trying to work on vacuum, So I want to get to the point where I can hold all my pieces down using a vacuum. So I've got the vacuum pump and some 10mm tube, you can just see there on the right hand side, but right now I didn't have enough elbows when I made this first iteration of the jig, and I will say the first iteration of the jig is too tall. So I max out in height because I've got nearly 80mm high in that jig. There's 4 pieces of 18mm MDF that make the top of that, and it's just too high. It needs to come down. So at some point I will probably create a video of vacuum jig Mark II. The rest of this section is mainly repeats. So again, I use a 2mm end mill to carve out the bulk of the material, and then once the 2mm end mill has done its work, I use the SPE bit, the 5.25 tapered ball nose with a 0.25 tip. It's a very, very fine point to match the mouths. After I've cut out the second slot, I then tidy up the edges again. I then glue in the second colour. So you can see here it's walnut, and at this point I've messed up the first one, and the reason for that was that I missaved the clear out or clearance tool with the taper tool. So when the clearance tool was in the machine, it run the taper tool's path and then spoilt it. Attention to detail, very important when it comes to CNC and the programming. But another good lesson. Here you can see I'm now cutting the last pocket inlay for the cherry, the walnut and the maple are glued in. They've been faced off on the bandsaw again, and here's the 2mm end mill just carving out the bulk of the material, leaving that pocket ready for the maple to go in. It's been a good test. I think that one of the hardest things for this was designing it on the CAD software. So I use VCarve, but trying to get the angles was a little bit more mathematical than I expected. So the center triangle is all 60 degrees. So it's a 60-degree triangle. So all the lengths are exactly the same on the inner triangle. But obviously as you create the vectors to go out from that inner triangle, the lengths on those pieces change. And what I wanted to do was to make it so that the one triangle I could reuse the mouth fitting for all 3 colours, and that took me a while. So I did manage it in the end, but it was a good few hours to get to the point where I got that cracked. But I did learn a few new tricks in terms of using Vectric. So a valuable lesson. Here I've cleared off the tool and I've just marked up the divides for the coasters, and I think if I did this again I would use the tapered bit to outline where I need to cut within the CAD software rather than have to do it by hand afterwards. After I've cut the coasters to their squares, I'm then sanding down the coaster. So I also thin them out because they were made from 18mm material, so I took them down to about 12mm. And I think this is me just taking the bandsaw marks off the back. Once all of the coasters have been sanded, that was 120, I then round over all the corners, just using the smallest round over bit I've got. And once I've done that, I just then come back and resand the coasters going up the grit. So I think that's 180 grit there. I then water pop all of the coasters, dry them off, and I missed recording it, but I then hand sanded with that bit of 150. You can see in the picture all the corners down and took all the rough edges off, so after the water pop. And then it was my favourite finish, Osmo's top oil, and I just love the way that the Osmos makes all of the different wood species pop here. So the dark walnut with the medium cherry with the light maple with the contrasting oak in the background. So I hope you enjoyed watching this project. If you prefer these kind of videos to the normal kind of videos I do, let me know. If there's something that I've missed or some detail that I'm not getting to in the videos, give me some feedback. I'll do my best to incorporate that into future videos. If you've made it this far, a like and subscribe would go to bringing a smile to my face, and kind of just give me some confidence to continue trying to make newer and better pieces for you. If you've got any ideas of things you'd like to see made, then chuck them in the comments and I'll see what I can do. But I think that just about brings this video to an end, with the only thing left a few finish shots with some photography just to display the coasters in all their glory. So here we go.